Radio on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the husband of Scotland's former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has been charged with embezzling funds from the SNP. The party's ex-chief executive, Peter Murrell, was first arrested a year ago. We can get more on this now from LBC's political editor in Scotland, Gina Davidson.
He's no longer in police custody. He's been allowed to go home, and a report will now be sent to the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service. But the investigation is carrying on. It doesn't seem to end with this charge against Peter Murrell, who, of course, just over a year ago was the chief executive of the SNP.
The Labour leader says police should investigate claims that a Tory MP misused campaign funds. Mark Menzies has stepped down from the parliamentary party over allegations he's used thousands of pounds of donors' money to pay for medical expenses. He denies any wrongdoing. The Scottish Government accepted its target of reducing emissions by 75% within the next 6 years is out of reach and has scrapped it. Ministers insist the ultimate 2045 net zero goals won't budge and blame budget restraints imposed by Westminster. Douglas Lumsden speaks for the Scottish Tories.
A lot of smoke and mirrors, rehashing announcements and blaming everyone else they can for their own failure. The key areas of emissions are devolved: transport, housing, agriculture. And this announcement is an absolute humiliation for the SNP.
Well, the Treasury says climate change is a devolved issue and Scotland has had a £41 billion settlement from Westminster. The UK and US have issued new sanctions on Iran in response to its drone and missile attack against Israel. Britain's freezing the assets of 13 military leaders and organisations. A man who was wrongly jailed for 17 years for rape says a formal apology is too little, too late. The Criminal Cases Review Commission said sorry for failing Andrew Malkinson, who was twice refused appeals against his conviction. And half of the potential jurors in Donald Trump's hush money trial have been excused after being asked to fill out questionnaires before being selected. One said the former US president was less orange than she expected. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 29 points at 78.77. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy. Climate action you can be proud of.
Cloud and rain clearing all but the far south tonight. Chilly with frost possible elsewhere and a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're streaming this hour live on Global Play if you'd like to watch us. And the reason is because we have Theo Paphitis with us in the studio, entrepreneur, former Dragon's Den star, the chairman of Ryman, Robert Dias and Boo Avenue. Theo, welcome again.
Thank you, Ian.
As I said before in the talk up, we really enjoyed having you before. We got a huge reaction to you coming on before, so we thought we'd have you back.
Oh, my word.
And there'll be lots of people who want to have a word with you directly. You can do that by phoning 0345 6060 973. If you can't get to a phone, you can text. Well, I suppose you need to text us on a phone, don't you? On 84850. You can send a WhatsApp message on the normal phone number as well. Let's start off by talking a little bit about the state of the retail sector in Britain and indeed the state of the economy. Now, we're now a couple of years on from COVID. Do you feel that the retail sector is back on its feet?
It's been flat. This last year's been very flat. I mean, it's a smidgen down on the previous year, so we've not seen any growth. But it's been quite a tumultuous year, isn't it? It's been a very, very difficult year, from energy costs to container costs to inflation cost, payroll costs. I mean, you name it, as poor old shopkeepers, we've had it.
And I think that's absolutely true, and it does seem one thing after another. And I mean, have you sort of ever had that feeling? You sort of get into the office one morning and think, well, not. It's a bit like Brenda in Bristol about elections. Not another thing.
Well, it's a bit like that, because we've had a curved ball. Every time we get through one curved ball, another curved ball comes. And since COVID, it's probably been the most, not probably, that's the wrong word, it's definitely been the most testing time of my shopkeeping career. There's no question about that.
And in terms of how what you sell, presumably if you draw a graph of the proportion of your turnover that comes from online sales, that continues to grow exponentially.
Well,
or does it?
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? Well, it's not quite that simple. So a variety of different businesses that I've got in retail. But what we've definitely seen, obviously COVID online went absolutely nuts. And that grew. And everybody got carried away with the valuations of online businesses. Businesses turning over 2 and 6pence were valued at more than Marks and Spencer's or Next. I mean, clearly they've gone down by 95% now and gone back to the real world because the consumer's gone back to some of their previous habits. But online is here to stay, but it's growing a lot more sensibly now and slowly, and it's still taking part of the physical retail business. I think the biggest worry that many retailers like me have got is that the fact that physical retail is very much community-based. Online is slightly faceless, but the cost of doing business physically compared to the cost of doing business online is disproportionate, bearing in mind what is a very archaic tax, which is the business rates. If anyone doesn't know what business rates are, basically it's like your equivalent to council tax. Imagine how you would feel if your next door neighbour's house was exempt. They didn't have to pay council tax, but you had to pay council tax. And actually your council tax was probably the same as your mortgage or your rent, because they bear no reality to why they existed in the first place. It's just a way for the government to say, oh my God, I need to make that number balance. I need more money. So I know what we'll do. We'll put business rates up by 6.7%. Inflation is going downwards to 3 and 2%. But that's an easy way for us to get some money. What that causes, of course, is more physical retailers to go bankrupt and shut down, which means the take that the Exchequer gets becomes less because there's less people paying. And then they go, we've got less money coming in. We now need more money. We'll put the tax up on those that are actually paying. And it continues into a spiral. Then, of course, you've got the online players who pay very little business rates. Some pay no corporation tax in the United Kingdom. Some pay no import tax into the United Kingdom. And some pay no VAT to the United Kingdom Exchequer. So they actually make zero contribution, but just take the business away from our retailers and the high street. It's a pretty nutty place to be in at the moment. It's quite surreal. So why is it that successive generations of politicians have never really bought the argument which you've just so eloquently put? Because everything you've said there is an absolute fact. It's not your opinion. It is a fact. Yep. And there are surely enough politicians who've worked in business, or maybe there aren't, I don't know how many of them have ever owned a retail business, for example. But this is not sustainable, is it? And there will be a day of reckoning in the end. Well, the British Retail Consortium have been banging on for ages. I've been banging on like a broken record for the last 10, 15 years. Every time I see a politician, they nod their heads and say, we understand, Theo, but it's not that simple. Well, it is. The principle is that simple. The reality is that simple. But the bit that's not that simple for them is to get off their backsides and do something about it, because it's complicated. As we all accept, it's complicated. And they've got to get rid of a broken tax that was from the 1500s, where ye old internet didn't exist, and create a tax that's suitable for the 21st century. And what form would that take? Well, that is an interesting question. And I'm not going to give you the answer to it, because there's a lot cleverer people than me in the Treasury. A lot cleverer people, and a lot more. But they're the roadblock here. Yeah. But are they? Yes, absolutely. Or is it everything stops at the Treasury? They are the people that stop reform happening because it's not in their interests. Well, it is. It is in their interest. Let me explain to you why it's definitely in their interest, which makes it even more balmy than it already sounds. And it's like we're talking on a parallel universe here. What makes it even more balmy is that the Exchequer needs money. a lot more money. You know, we've got increased costs in our health services, as all our other services that we expect the government to provide for us. We've got burdening debt that's 100% of our GDP now. So you'd have thought they would devise a way where they could collect more tax from more people rather than try and get more tax from the same people and let the other pay no tax. So you actually, by devising a new taxation system, which is fairer, would yield more money to the Treasury that would give them more money to spend on our services. So it's definitely in their benefit. It will create some work.
But you've got to have an idea of what kind of tax this would be, because it could be an extra sales tax. You could say, well, put more on VAT, but then, of course, then the companies that don't pay VAT in this country to the extent that they should, they would get off from that. Is there actually a tax out there that would meet all of your requirements?
I would say I and many other retailers are open to suggestions. Now, we've all got suggestions, right? And we've all got ideas. But for instance, a retailer with a very low margin, say, selling electrical goods, it would be very expensive for them to pay a percentage of the transaction, whereas somebody selling lingerie, which is a higher margin product, could then afford to pay a percentage. So it's very difficult. But we've managed to create, what's strange about all this? We have managed to create taxation on things like air travel, insurance, that does work. So they've got to sit down. It's a complex equation, but they've got to sit down and they've got to work it out in the fairest way. But the end result, I will guarantee you, and I promise you, will be more cash in the coffers of the Exchequer to be spent on the things we all need and require.
Do you think the power of the massive companies like Amazon is the problem here, that they have such a massive lobbying power that they can outgun the British Retail Consortium?
Well, God bless the British Retail Consortium. It's not just about them. I mean, they've got lobbying that rolls, as you know, straight into the White House and from the White House down to number 10. And many of the companies historically were American. But we've now seen the rise of many companies out of China and other areas. So it's not just about that. We need to take a holistic approach in our taxation. We can't keep taxing the smaller part of the cake that becomes smaller and smaller, and because it's self-prophesizing into destruction. We've got to collect the taxes that we're not collecting. That will give them more money, and that requires work. Various governments have promised they'll look at it. They haven't. Interestingly enough, Rachel Reeves did say recently that she wants to completely overhaul the broken business rates. Now, that's the first time that someone said it that's got a chance of getting into power.
But we can all say things, but she's given no indication of how she would do it.
Not only is she not given an indication, we've not seen a manifesto yet, have we?
No, and she will say whenever she comes on my programme, I can't form policy on your programme. And I said, well, I'm not asking you to, but if you say you want to do something, even 6 months out from an election, you surely got to have a bit of an idea of how you're going to do it.
But you've got a situation where you've got the government of the last budget that was the most unimaginative, lazy budget in my lifetime I've ever seen. Who stole the Labour Party policy on non-DOMs, knowing full well they were never going to implement it in the period that's left, but that we'll have that for political reasons. So it's very easy for people
politicians.
Well, they are, but we're really that comment is says it all, really. We've all got to the stage now where we just think they are politicians, which means they can say lies, and we'll accept it. It's got to stop. We've got to raise our standards, our expectations of politicians.
Now, in the past, you've been seen as a Conservative supporter, but I'm getting the feeling that you may be drifting away from them and going to Labour now.
My vote is here to be taken. I haven't made my mind up at the moment. I can't see myself voting for the Tories, to be honest with you. I mean, they have been appalling, haven't they? Absolutely appalling, which is tragic. They spent most of the time ripping themselves apart than working on the things that the government need to do for the sake of the country. Now, saying that, Labour Party are unknown. I mean, you're hearing some good things, but they've not been in power for a long time. It's a lot of inexperienced people in that. So even if they wish to do something and achieve aims, have they got the capability? What we've seen from the Tories recently, the quality and the capability of some of our politicians has been below par, to say the least. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one.
We're going to take some questions for you in a moment.
Excellent.
So if people would like to phone in with a question for Theo, 0345 6060 973. I've got a whole host of WhatsApp questions here and text, but if you'd like to speak to the great man, you can do so in just a couple of minutes' time. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Theo Paphitis is with us, entrepreneur, former Dragon's Den star. Do you miss Dragon's Den? Because you were a real character on that.
I loved it. I had a great time. I was there on it for about 8 or 9 years. I've been back twice since. I've had more comebacks on Dragon's Den than Frank Sinatra. It's a great show. It's an actual great show. But I've done my term, as
And
they
it's
say.
one of the few shows on British television, or indeed radio, come to that matter, that actually do cover business. It's a travesty, isn't it?
And they cover it simply, because business is not that complicated. It's people that complicate business. And that's what's brilliant about Dragon's Den. It really lays it out very simply. Even though I call it simple, it's amazing how wrong we sometimes get it.
Do you think the media are failing the British public by not covering business enough? I mean, I can't really think of any other sort of mainstream programmes that there are.
Well, we've had historically, there's been very little. I mean, Dragon's Den and Apprentice clearly are the two that have that bent. And there's been a few others that have attempted to do, but I think the jeopardy that's required for television doesn't always fit well with business, to be honest with you. And that's the magic formula of Dragon's Den. And of course, Dragon's Den was a show that came from Japan. And it was very, very different before the BBC got their hands on it. I mean, it was more like a quiz game show. I mean, it was quite loud, lights and everything. And the BBC got a hold of it and completely reinvented it. And of course, it's that format that has grown all around the world. And of course, in the States, they couldn't have Dragon's Den. They had to give it a different name, and it's called Shark's Tank. Although the rights are still, if I'm not mistaken, still owned by Sony.
Right, let's come to your calls. 0345 6060 973. Peter is in Oxford. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Theo.
Hello,
Great
Peter.
to talk to you. How are you? So my question concerns Brexit. And my question from the point of view of business, has Brexit just been damaging or has it been catastrophic? And what can be done to mitigate the damage?
Okay, that's a hell of a question, Peter. But of course, the whole Brexit outcome got seriously confused with COVID, because COVID came along and completely mixed everything up. So it's hard to actually put your finger on what has the effect of Brexit on business. Now, what I can tell you is business didn't expect Brexit to be so problematic in the delivery when it came to it, with our politicians, quite honestly, making a bit of a pig's ear of it, but they're so keen to get it done, and it became a political football. If you remember now, all those votes proroguing Parliament and everything else, it became an absolute nightmare. So I remember the few days after Brexit, I wrote an article on my website, and I did say whether Brexit decision was right or wrong will depend purely now on the quality of our politicians and their ability to execute it. And if I had to mark it between 1 being rubbish and 10 being brilliant, I wouldn't be far off the 1 to 2 mark, sadly.
But how has it affected some of your businesses?
I don't think, I'm in the consumer business, which is in retail, and a lot of our product doesn't just come from Europe. It comes from the Far East. It hasn't really had that massive effect. Where we've had a problem is if we're trying to trade back into Europe, and it's got easier. It's got a lot easier. Let me just put that. It's got a lot, but it's taken a long time. The whole execution and the paperwork and the organisation and the way we fell out spectacularly with the EU on our exit of the EU. That was harsh. It was. People said they didn't want a hard Brexit. I don't think we were far off it, to be honest with you. I don't think there was such a thing as the shutters were going to go down overnight and it was going to be binary, black and white. There was always going to be some form of compromise. No one believed it would be binary. But I don't think anyone believed that we would find it so antagonistic and difficult to execute the sensible things that need to happen between two trading organisations, whether you love each other or not. Divorce is never easy, and it felt a bit like a divorce. But time has gone by now, and things do seem to be getting a little bit softer. And the EU have had a change of management, as they say. As well, so they're not.
We've had about 3.
We've only 3. God blimey!
But you see, it's interesting. After 9 o'clock, we're going to be talking about this rather interesting story that's come from Brussels today. The EU is now proposing to return to pre-Brexit free movement for UK and EU young people. Sort of 18 to 30 will get free movement again, both from the EU and from Britain. Now that strikes me. I mean,
that's discriminatory. You can't. That's against the EU rules.
Why?
It's age. Discriminatory.
I don't think it would.
I'll take them to the European Court on that bat. Outrageous.
I think that's the newsline from this interview so far.
Is that what you've been waiting for?
Well, you always wait for a newsline to come out of these hours.
But that doesn't sound right.
I mean, what I mean, I think it's just interesting symbolically that they've come up. I mean, I'm assuming it is a serious proposal. They wouldn't have done that a couple of years ago because there was still this overhanging antagonism both ways, yeah. I think. But I think it's quite an interesting thing.
I mean, is that an at first I'm hearing of it, so I don't know where that's come from and how serious a proposal, or is that just someone flying a kite because they had nothing better to do, or the fact that Nigel Farage was there a couple of days ago and upset them all?
It's come from The Guardian, so
it's got to be true.
Pay your money, make your choice.
But certainly, I think whoever comes into the next...
apparently it's coming from Sweden. The Swedish Minister for European Affairs, Jessica Rosvall, told The Guardian, Sweden has pushed for this and we feel this is very important for the youth and students in the EU and the UK. They are the winners.
Is that freedom to travel or work or what?
Both, I assume.
Well, you see, we're just flying kites. I think it's one of those stories that on a quiet news day, and I'm not sure it's a quiet news day.
But apparently France already has such an agreement with Canada. Australia has a similar deal with us, so it's part of the trade deal, I think. So who knows?
Well, that means we're going to have a trade deal.
Well, we have a trade deal. It just doesn't
very
seem
good
to work
one.
very well. I mean, I was really shocked the other day when I sent a book to someone in France that was worth £25 hardback, and they emailed me to say, I've just had to pay €14 customs duty on this. And I'm thinking, but we were told that we had a free trade deal with the EU.
No, we haven't.
Well, we clearly haven't.
Well, we never have had.
Well, that's what they described it as when they came to the agreement.
Well, I tell you, there wasn't a border in the Irish Sea. You believe that as well? And for every drop of rain...
I'm very gullible.
Boris said for every drop of rain, a flower would grow.
Did he?
Well,
not quite sure
he
what
might
to make of that.
He might as well have done.
Peter, let me come back to you, because you clearly think Brexit has either been a disaster or a catastrophe.
We forgot about Peter.
Obviously, Theo,
Hi.
It doesn't seem to have affected his business.
He's on the fence.
Well, I wasn't going to say on the fence, but what would be your argument to him that it has been an absolute disaster?
Well, I mean, obviously, we hear from people who are exporting, of all things, fish, which are meant to be a huge beneficiary of the TCA, and they've, in many cases, gone out of business. Shellfish in England are now dying, and that's just a very small example among many, many thousands of business. I mean, I think there are huge opportunities in Brexit, but there are opportunities for smugglers, criminals, people traffickers, venture capitalists, but not for ordinary people. There are none.
Yeah,
and we know
I love the way you're classifying venture capitalists alongside drug smugglers. Being slightly uncharitable.
I'm sorry. When I say that, I mean people who are gambling on the misfortune of others. Now, I don't mean Theo, of course. No, but what I'm saying is that if you predicate your Brexit plan on the belief that Tory politicians can act with competence and probity, then that, frankly, is a very, very bad plan. And that's very much what Theo has said was done. It should have been foreseeable that they would make a mess of it. And, of course, when people voted for Brexit, they weren't voting to leave the single market. You know, they were told by Farage and others, but they'd be like Norway.
I was.
I know, but for a lot of people, what they were voting for was the best of both worlds, and you have your cake and eat it. And they've discovered that isn't possible.
But I think, Peter, I think there was always a case that there was going to be some give and take. There was no way that we were going to have a free trade deal with the EU after we left. That was just for the birds. It was always going to be a negotiation and some give and take, and would find a working relationship as trading partners, as you do with any trading partner. The problem is, take on board, it was very, very sore at the time, and it was a bit like a divorce. And the second thing was the level of incompetence within the government at that particular time wasn't helpful. And then throw on top a bit of COVID on top of that, the odd party at number 10, getting busy. It all did not deliver, I think, well, I know, what people expected it to deliver. Saying that, it's taken longer, but you do sense that we are slowly getting there to something far more reasonable.
I think that's absolutely right. I still think that voting for Brexit can be easily justified because it has given the country the opportunity to do a lot of things that it couldn't do within the EU. And the fact that we've had an incompetent government that hasn't actually availed itself of any of those opportunities, I think is a crying shame. But things do seem to be quietening down. I think the political side, I think relations now between this country and various other European countries have got back to a much better level. And hopefully we can move on from there. Right, let's go to Alex. Thank you very much, Peter. Alex is in Finchley. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Theo. I'm one of the Dragon's Den rejects. I was actually a guinea pig for Deborah Meaden before she joined in 2006.
Oh, excellent.
So, yes. And luckily she told me that she wouldn't like my business, but I made it into a multi-million-pound business.
Well done, you.
Yes. And the only thing I wanted to say is that I'm finding it very challenging now in this current period in running a business, especially because of the banks. The banks are really, they don't know their customers and they are not engaging with their customers. It's all going towards AI and ticking boxes. And
what sector, Alex, without looking to give you any form of advice, because I'm not here to do that, what sector are you in?
I'm in the finance business, currencies.
You're in the currency business. Okay, there's not a lot more I'm going to add to your industry. That's not my area of speciality, but you seem to have done well on it.
But what are you finding difficult, Alex?
What I'm finding difficult is that engaging with banks is difficult now because they are going by some compliance regulations, not only for myself, but in all sectors now. They're closing down bank accounts and they're being difficult because they just don't understand their businesses, their customers. And they are relying too much on artificial intelligence to tick boxes to say that who their customers are.
Well, I think you make some really interesting points there. I should at this point declare an interest because I've just become a non-executive director of the Lending Standards Board. So what you've just said there, Alex, is kind of meat and drink to, particularly on the debanking issue. I think, if you were listening when all that was happening a few months ago, I was, shall we say, quite trenchant in my criticism of some of the banks for what they're doing on this. And it's not just affecting rich people, I've seen Nigel Farage could be described as rich, but it is affecting ordinary Brits, particularly if you have a name that sounds as if you're from an ethnic minority. That is a problem.
Is that right?
Yeah, it absolutely is right.
Yes, I've had 2 bank accounts closed because I have an ethnic minority name.
Yeah.
My personal bank account.
That's a disgrace.
Is there stats to this? Do we have stats to back that up?
Well, I remember when all this started, it was all about Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
And
the Queen's bankers. It was big news.
And I'd sort of had a few experiences with banks myself. I've never been debanked, but I know a few people that have. And Saida Varsi, the former Conservative Party chair, who's now in the House of Lords, she rang me up and she said, "Look, this is happening every day to Muslims," and she gave me a catalogue of examples of it. And she said they're not getting the publicity, but it's not just the likes of Nigel Farage that this is happening to.
And I'm sure with your new role, are you then able to ask the banks to explain themselves with this specific point?
Well, given that I'm only 18 days into this new role...
Oh, for goodness sake, do get on with it.
People want instant gratification, don't they? But it's a really interesting... And to be honest, the reason that I applied for this and the reason that they wanted me on board was because of calls like Alex. Because they know that doing a programme like this, I kind of get an idea of what the public are thinking about the financial sector and the banks.
But what's brilliant about this particular subject, Ian, it's a number, right? It's not an opinion, it's a number. And banks have to give numbers out to all the various bodies that they report to. So actually asking a bank the question, which is quite simple, I know I simplify things a little bit, but that's the dragon's den in me. It's quite simple, is how many accounts did you close down last year? And the year before, and the year before that? Now, they would have to give those numbers. And then we talked about AI, using AI and getting that stats anonymously, it's very easy to see if there's a pattern. It shouldn't be a difficult one for us to debunk or justify. That's a fact. That's why I find it a hard one. The Nigel and the Coutts situation was extreme. I don't know what's behind that. I don't know enough about it, to be honest, to make a comment on it. But the serious issue that you're talking about now, which is a serious issue if this is going on, shouldn't take us long to actually navigate and find out if it really is.
Exactly. And I think the other issue that a lot of smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses have a problem with is access to finance.
Different conversation.
It is a different conversation, but it's a really important one. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Let's get the news headlines on LBC at 8:34 with Daryl Jackson.
The husband of Scotland's former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has been charged with embezzling funds from the SNP. The party's ex-chief executive, Peter Murrell, was first arrested a year ago. The Criminal Cases Review Commission has admitted failing a man who spent 17 years in jail after being wrongly convicted of rape. It's offered Andrew Malkinson an unreserved apology. And the UK and the US have issued new sanctions on Iran in response to its attack on Israel at the weekend. Britain's freezing the assets of 13 military leaders and organisations, including the country's navy and the chief of its army. LBC weather, cloud and rain clearing all but the far south tonight. Chilly with frost possible and a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:36. Theo Paphitis is with us taking your calls and text questions. Let's go to Tony in Saddleworth. Hello, Tony.
Hello, evening, Ian. Good evening, Theo.
Hello, Tony.
I'd just like to ask you about your business model with regards to shoplifting. I mean, it's a massive problem. How have you managed to factor in, and have you come up with a solution that could end this disease that's putting all these firms out of business? Have you had a chance to think about it?
I've had a chance to think about it. We talk about it all the time, Tony. It's a serious issue. And then you look at it, is it a societal issue, an economic issue, number one. Secondly, are the police, do they have the manpower to deal with these things at such a low level of crime? But a value level is what I'm talking about. But the third thing is, it is illegal, it is criminal, but it's also when our staff try to protect themselves and their products in the stores, that we do have to ask them to back off, because we don't want to endanger them. And what we're seeing now is more and more violence pointed towards our colleagues in our stores, and that takes it, to me, it's a different level, and that should, the monetary value of investigation should go out the window at that stage, and it should be treated as a violent crime, and that's exactly what it is now. And we're trialing body cams, making sure people realise they can be recorded, sharing data with other colleagues in other businesses to make sure that we can identify these people, because you do get gangs going into stores and just grabbing a whole lot of products and just casually walking out and saying, what are you going to do about it? And that then becomes a societal issue, not just a criminal point.
Have you worked out what, if there's been a percentage increase in shoplifting, say, over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years?
Yeah, in retail, we call it shrinkage. Shrinkage is the stock that you lose from your stock file, and basically it's theft. And there's no question, certainly, since, if we just go through to COVID, which is the last couple of 2 or 3 years, there's been a marked increase in shrinkage, and that's something that we're all looking at. But at the end of the day, you're retailers. You have to put your wares on the shelves. You've got to allow people to see the product. But there's very little you can do if a group of people come in and just take a whole rail of clothes or a whole load of air fryers and just walk out with them. And we certainly wouldn't recommend that our colleagues approach them at that situation other than call the police. But by the time that happens, it's too late.
I mean, in a way, it's a silly question, but are police doing enough to prevent shoplifting? Because it's actually only shopkeepers that can prevent shoplifting, isn't it?
Well, we can do everything we can. We can look about where we put the high-priced products somewhere where they can be monitored, where what we tag. But if people are not bothered with the tags and they're quite happy to be brazen about it and don't care if they get caught, then that's where it becomes a society issue. And that can only be looked at in the light of the whole economic outlook. But it's just, we've had worse economic times than this. For me, it's not just the economic outlook. It's the fact that people feel that they can do this. We've got a very divisive world at the moment, which is quite polarised and difficult, where I won't use the word nasty, but it's going towards that, where everything becomes a problem and an aggression. And that's coming through in the way that our society is moving.
Right, let's take a couple of WhatsApp questions. This is from Rob, who says, if retail is suffering, how come Tesco's profits have tripled?
There's different sectors of retail. You're talking about food now. Tesco's is food. I think you'll find that all the food supermarkets have done very well recently. I'll let you work that one out.
I'm not qualified to work that one out. I mean, which sectors aren't doing very well?
Well, clothing certainly isn't doing well. But if you look at food retailers have been doing incredibly well. And they've benefited in some ways from some of the inflationary pressures. But you are seeing supermarkets now working on that and trying to get their costs down as well as their pricing down.
Gareth says, could you ask Theo what his thoughts are on the possibility of introducing an internet transaction tax for every online sale and use the money to reduce business rates?
Sounds like certainly an idea that a lot of people will be open to, and a lot of people have already suggested. The problem you've got is it a percentage of the sale, or is it just a fixed charge? And would you do it into different sectors? So if it's electronics, is it point something of a percent, or is it just £5, £3, £2? That's the difficulty, is making, and that's where the work has to be done, where different sectors will need different levels of taxation if you take just a transaction.
Now, here's an interesting one. Eamon says, would Theo support lower VAT on items purchased in store on the high street and higher VAT on items purchased online?
Listen, that's another thing that's been discussed many times, changing the VAT element of a transaction to drive people. But then you'll have a situation where people will say you're unfairly prejudicing online in favour of the physical retail outlets. Now, I personally would not be too much against that, but there'll be lots of people that would argue with that. So you've got to find that fine balance.
Let's go to Nada in Watford. Hello, Nada.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
You might have covered part of my question because it was about the online sales. And I think it's quite unfair that businesses are not on the same footing when they are online and when they're physically in a high street. Especially, as Theo pointed out, it's more expensive on the high street because of business rates. And yet online shoppers don't get to pay any rates. And it was really, how do we put in business rates? Is there a way of doing it that could be sensible for everyone and then put everybody on an equal footing, which to me makes a lot more sense because then the Treasury has more money and people that are on ground and high streets, in fact, should be paying less than online because their overheads are so much more.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I am sure the Treasury can model various scenarios where this could be applied and work out what the take would be for the Treasury and what the effect would be, not just for the physical retail, but the way that physical retail deals with its community. I mean, does everybody have to go into their car and drive somewhere? Why shouldn't people be able to go into their high street and find most of the things that they require? But of course, we're going to get to a stage where unless you get it delivered or you get into your car and drive somewhere, you won't be able to buy anything.
Because there will come a breaking point at one point, won't there, where shops like yours, it won't be economic to operate on the high street anymore.
There's an interesting Ryman just launched a new initiative, and that's about linking technology and linking the online and the app purchase to a reason to go into store. And it's very simple. I think most of us use online greeting cards where we personalise a greeting card on our phone or on our laptop or on our tablet, and then the company sends it to you, and there's quite a few big players in the market. They send it to you a few days later or send it directly to the recipient. What Ryman have done, they've created an app, and it's a greeting card app, basically, so you can design your own greeting card, use your own photographs from your phone and everything else. But what's interesting is not only can you have it sent directly to the recipient or to you to give to the recipient, but you can pick it up from the store within 60 minutes. So instead of waiting for days for your online personalised card, you can actually go to any of the 200 Ryman stores and pick up your card, your nominated store. You say, I want to pick it up from Fleet Street or whatever, pop in, London Wall, pop in and pick up your personalised card. Now...
But why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just send it like you do on JibJab?
Because people want to give physical card, number one. Lots of people want to give it. They want to write.
How old-fashioned!
I know, it's terrible. Well, we still. Do you know the United Kingdom is actually one of the leading countries for actually physical cards? But what's interesting about this is using technology to drive people back into a store and using your high street store, but still interacting with the digital technology. So all our retailers now in the high street, we have to have a reason to exist, and if we lose that reason to exist. Then obviously we disappear. And if
so that's the reason that a lot of big retailers are saying, yes, you can order online, but you can pick it up in store. And I've always thought that's really weird. Why, if you order it online, why wouldn't you want it to be delivered?
Well, if you're going to wait for it to be delivered, number one. And listen, we can't live our world with white vans running around our roads delivering one hair gel to your home, Ian.
I don't need hair gel.
Well,
nor do you. Bad choice, Theo. Bad choice.
It was intentional. I thought I'd get a reaction. But delivering one hair gel for $2.99. I mean, it's ridiculous when we're talking about the environment. And
but we as consumers have responsibility there, don't we? In that, I mean, I have in the past been guilty of doing exactly that, ordering something because I want it sort of very quickly. But I now actually combine all my things. I don't order things if it's just one. I'll wait till I've got 5 or 6 things.
Because you're so sensible.
I know.
You're so
sensible. It's too good for my own good.
Exactly. So the reality is, people can still have things, and click and collect is great because you know that it's in stock, you know it's waiting for you, and you can pick it up next time you're in the high street. You don't have to have a van running around, and you don't have to wait in for it either.
The real reason I don't like too many deliveries is because I'm fed up with my dogs barking when the driver arrives.
And you've obviously got a lot of time waiting. You're at home waiting for the delivery van to turn up.
It's 8:48.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Conservative MP and Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, the Tories trail Labour on defence, so you don't even have votes there, Mr Shapps.
Starmer is now going around saying, don't worry, defence is safe with us, the nuclear deterrent is safe with us. Meanwhile, he's got 11 members of his shadow team who voted against Trident.
Ed Miliband is Shadow Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. You were leader of the Labour Party. If you had issues concerning your deputy leader, would you read every every piece of advice available or decline, as Sir Keir has with Angela Rayner?
I would do what Keir's done, which is...
Why, Ed?
He trusts Angela. I do 100%.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. Iain Dale on LBC. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
8:51 on LBC. Theo Paphitis is with us answering your calls and texts. Nadeem says, Theo makes an important point in terms of smaller online businesses having an impact on high street retailers. Does he think that given his expertise in business, could his business empire provide some of those online providers that doesn't make sense. Offering a form of mentorship on a mutual gain perspective that would potentially mitigate against some of the impact he's highlighted.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I get that. I think what he's doing is encouraging online retailers to work more closely with physical retailers and form partnerships. So that's how I'm interpreting it.
Well, listen. But there's no reason why online shouldn't work with physical, and it does. We have both online and physical. Robert Dyer's, for instance, 45% of his turnover is actually online. And we've got 92 stores throughout the country that do the rest of it. So that's the multi-channel retailer. But you can click and collect, you can pick up from store, so there's that advantage. But the important thing is we're in your high street. You don't have to just get in your car and drive. You can pick up most of the things that you need. I mean, where else can you buy a kettle in your high street? There's not very many places, or an air fryer. Or
would you ever have thought that it would get to 45%? Because I mean, with the products that Robert Dyer sells, I mean, not natural things that people might think of ordering on the internet.
Well, when I bought the business, it did zilch online, and it just shows that when you get half of your turnover. Now that definitely would have had an effect on the turnover you get from store, but we've managed to grow both at the same time. And that's been the important part of mixing the two and using the technology so that there's a place for it. But going back to the cost of doing physical retail in the high street, business retail pays 22% of all business rates, whereas we only account for 10% of the economy. So it's a really unfair tax to retailers. I keep harping on about it, but it's just nonsensical. So I'm not saying stop online retail, just a level playing field between online and physical. I'm in both. So whatever I'm going to benefit on one side, I'm sure I'm going to pay for it the other side, right? But I'm a big believer in being in the community and having physical retail.
Right, let's go to Chris, who's a new caller in Norwich. Hello, Chris. Oh, Chris, you're very loud. What's going on there?
How you doing? Sorry, I'm a passenger in a car, so...
Okay. Go ahead. Chris, go ahead.
Sorry, hi, how you doing? You okay?
Yeah. What would you like to ask?
So I was just saying that I think business rates for physical property should be cut, and I think that burden should be hoisted over to the internet companies. I don't think that physical businesses can carry on coping with what they've been going through. And I think that the more we take away the physical shopping and retail side of things, people don't realise that, in actual fact, that shopping is a big part of family life.
Okay, Theo?
Yeah, and I could agree more. Business rates have gone up 6.7% this year. Well, how can you justify that? 6.7%. What's inflation? 3%. It's nonsensical. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
And it makes it quite difficult to plan, doesn't it? And businesses want certainty.
Well, what it does do, the government would argue they're giving you certainty. They argued that last time. Yes, they're giving you certainty that you've got to cut costs. So you're looking at your man hours in the store, you're looking at all your other costs, you're cutting back left, right and centre to actually pay for that, which doesn't actually give a good customer experience and is against everything you're trying to do, especially in a community high street store.
Chris, thank you. Let's go to Wayne in Boston. Wayne, hi.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
What I'd like to ask is, many years ago, my little town was granted £20 million for a makeover to cobble in the main shopping mall area. But little did we know, once that was done, we wasn't allowed to take a vehicle into the town. Now, that is really sad. I mean, this is why people ain't getting to their main shops no more, because if I went into town, which I have done, I either get a parking ticket, I either have to park too far away from the shop I'd like to shop in. It's dire, it really is. And I think a council's have got a lot to do with this.
Well, certainly parking has been an issue with councils looking to get extra revenue by charging exorbitant fees for people driving into town, and but they're not having the transport infrastructure for people not to take the cars into town. Well, that can only lead to one thing: people not going into town. Again, sounds quite simple, logical.
Phil says, this sounds just like someone defending a dying business. I'm sure Amazon do pay business rates on the properties that they use. Well, I mean, they must pay some form of business rates, but they don't equate to what you pay, do they?
No, nowhere near. They pay on warehousing, which doesn't equate to nowhere near what you have to pay as far as the physical high street is concerned. And if you want to get all you talk about dying, does that mean that you're happy? You're happy then for people just to have everything delivered and there be no high street stores because it's the cost is such that they can't survive.
It was a WhatsApp message, so we can't ask.
That everything has to be bought online and delivered from a warehouse. Is that what we think our society wants and our consumer wants?
Valerie says, message for Theo, we absolutely loved him on Dragon's Den. Why did he leave?
I did a great stint. I did about 8 or 9 years and I've been back twice since. It was great, but everything else, really, things move on and you've got to do something else in your life. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I've got so many other things I still need to do.
And Adam says, I actually read this as baldest man in London town, but he says baddest man in London town. Love to Theo.
That's back to our hair gel again, Ian.
I think that's a compliment.
I'll
take it as a compliment. And thank you for joining us over the last hour. It's been a pleasure to have you back in the studio, and hopefully we can do it again very soon. That's Theo Paphitis, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to turn our attention to something I mentioned in the last hour, that the EU, or somebody in the EU anyway, is proposing to return to pre-Brexit free movement for UK and EU young people. Well, there doesn't seem to be anything not to like about that, does there? I mean, I thought even Brexiteers could sign up for that. Or is it, as Theo Paphitis said in this hour, could it be struck down for being ageist? So if you're 30, you can have free movement, but if you're 31, you can't. Or if you're 61, like me, you can't. 0345 6060 973. What's not to like about this proposal?